Okay, our next interview is with Michael Dawson of Dawson's Books. And Michael is a bookseller whose father was a bookseller, whose grandfather was a bookseller. And he has lots of roots and lots of stories to probably tell. But, Michael, why don't you start at the beginning? Your youth, education, brothers and sisters, parents. Take us up through college.
Okay. Let's see. I was born in 1956. As Michael mentioned, I was born into a bookseller family. My father is Muir Dawson. My mother is Agnes Dawson, both who've participated a lot in ABAA and ILAB activities. My father was partners with my uncle, Glenn Dawson, for 50 years in Dawson's Bookshop. So I grew up around the book trade. I had a lot of wonderful experiences as a kid where when I would do a school project or something, I think I remember in 8th grade we were doing ancient history. Well, my father gave me a Babylonian clay tablet to take the class, and that sort of won the prize.
I could imagine.
So I always had a good source for things like that. And then in high school, I was taking a world history class, and my father was dealing with a lot of Japanese prints, Yokohama prints. Yes. And so I made an 8mm film using hundreds of prints showing how the Japanese had opened Japan and the American influences. And it was, again, I was sort of won the top prize for doing something like that. So I had a lot of really great experiences with books and book people and book fairs as a child. When I went to college, I went to Santa Cruz and decided to study photography. And when I got out of college, I came to San Francisco and lived for about 8 years. I worked in the photography business. I taught at the University of San Francisco. I worked in a cooperative gallery. I taught at the New College of California. And I got a lot of sense about that background in photography. And then in the mid-'80s, I decided that I needed to either I was going to go and get a master's or do something else. And I decided, well, at that point in my life, I ought to consider the business. And so my wife and I moved back to Los Angeles in 1985, and I started working at Dawson's Bookshop full-time. And after a couple of years of doing that, I decided that it was something that I enjoyed doing. So I brought sort of an interest in photography in that area into their business, which was really focused on California and Western Americana and book arts, fine printing, and press books.
Yeah.
And so that's where that part of my history began. Yeah.
Are you still in the same premises in Los Angeles that you've been in for God knows how many years?
No, this last year I closed.
I remember. Yes.
I closed the business from that location, and I work out of my home now. It was interesting what Barney said in the previous interview about having a building. Well, we were fortunate enough to own a piece of property, and so we're now leasing that property, and that's a good thing for the whole family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What went in there?
Graphic design company.
Huh.
Yeah.
I still think it's one of the best bookshops in America.
Well, it was a great shop for many years. I loved the space. I loved being in there. I loved spending a lot of time. You know, I had morphed part of it into a gallery space over the last 10 years. But for the kind of business that I was doing and for the economics of the trade, it just didn't make any sense to have that space anymore. Yeah.
Do you have any children?
I have one child, and I'm an only child.
Right, I know that. How old is your child?
My son is 21.
Does he have any interest in following the Dawson tradition?
No.
So, like Mags, all things are going to end, huh?
All things are going to end, yeah. I mean, I felt that for whatever reason, it kind of became my burden for whatever to kind of finish up Dawson's Bookshop and then turn it into what I wanted to do.
Right.
I don't think my uncle or my father could have faced up to that in a certain way. Certainly not my father. And it's just part of the process, part of the economics. I think if you would have told me when I started in 1985 that I would, be in this situation now, I really wouldn't quite have believed it. But I think that we have seen such gigantic shifts in the way that the book trade operates, the rare book trade operates, since then, that it's almost impossible to comprehend that voyage.
It is. Talk a little bit about some of the people who influenced you, other than your dad and your uncle, who influenced you as you were beginning in the trade.
Yeah. I can remember really clearly having a wonderful conversation with Lucian Goldschmidt at one of the dinners before the book fair. And I just remember really being inspired by meeting him because since I was so passionate about photography, and Lucian was one of these people back in the 30s and 40s who was dealing with photography, sort of like Jams and,
He was a pioneer in that kind of material.
Yeah, and so we talked about things that certainly my uncle and father didn't know anything about, and photographers and people that he knew and various things. So he was one person that was really a great mentor to me. People that are still active in the trade that were really helpful to me when I started out was David Margolis and Gene Moss. Partly, not so much in influencing me about what I did in the trade, but showing me that kind of brotherhood or sisterhood of the rare book community, how open and giving people were, and it was so much beyond business. It was about relationships and supporting each other and doing that. Russ Todd was another guy that I really liked a lot.
He was a great book scout.
Right. And found a lot of things to work with him, enjoyed his company. Vernon Howard, I don't know if he was ever an ABAA member, but
he wasn't. But I remember his main room with a 40-foot high ceiling with books from floor to ceiling. There was
Uncle
just
Vern.
there was just no way you could look at everything and still live.
Yeah.
It was so. Yeah. He was a lot of fun too.
Yeah. So those are some of the people that I remember. When I started out in the book trade, that really gave me a sense of inspiration that this was a great way to spend a life.
Talk a little bit about your transition to computers. Lots of booksellers found it easy. Lots of booksellers resisted it, and then once they began, they said, "My God, this is wonderful." What was your experience?
Well, I guess because of the age that I was at that time, I didn't find it that difficult to comprehend that we needed to move in that direction. I think that under Bob Fleck's leadership at that point, I'm talking about mid-90s now, that he also had a really forward look and that we needed to achieve this. And I think that the first thing was to get a hold on your inventory. Right. So that you made something internally within. You needed to develop a system that was going to work for you internally. But also, he saw the writing on the wall very early about what the impact of the internet was going to be for the rare book trade, and encouraged me and others to sort of get out there and talk to people about it. And for myself, developing a database early on, integrating that into all aspects of my business, I think saved us in that period of time because we were able to then be more efficient in the way we handled books. And because everything was becoming, people expected A, accuracy, B, what do you have, and 3, when the ability to integrate that immediately onto the internet, if you had all your books on a database or online, you could get them up there faster than anyone. Right. And I can remember back in the days when there was ABE, when its small independent thing, A Libris, a few of the other things that were out there early. Interlock, right, with
Weatherford's first. That was the initial attempt to match buyers with sellers.
Right. And what I can remember is that it was almost instantaneous, the response.
Oh, yeah.
I used to have a person full-time doing nothing but handling my internet orders. When I started that, I was probably getting 40 to 50 orders a day.
How much material did you have up on the net?
At one time, I probably had about 20,000 items. I'm way. Right now, I have 600.
Well, your world is different.
Yeah. And so I kind of started out real big with that, but what happened is, of course, that we had all the efficiency, all the models. As more material came on, the prices just dropped because most of that material that I had on was not that competitive in terms of its rarity. We were always priced reasonably, But what happened is that as more and more people got involved in it, all they did was underprice whatever I had on there.
It was a race to the bottom.
A race to the bottom, and that's not a good race to have.
No, it's not a good race. We have a formula that for internet books, the best, the cheapest, the only. And I think if you follow that formula, you'll be okay.
Right.
Unfortunately, the internet is full of people with books at ridiculous prices.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, the other thing is that we've lost. I don't know if customers care that much anymore, but what they've lost without having the specialist, the educated dealer, is that the descriptions of material is just vastly. The range is incredible, and there are so many miscatalogued books, so much under cataloged material that you don't have the kind of credibility. The market doesn't have the same credibility that it used to have.
There's a lot of descriptions that are being cribbed from other booksellers that have a very nice copy, and that description winds up on a rebound copy lacking the flyleaf at the same price as the other copy.
Right.
And there's lots of unknowledgeable people roaming around out there, and we need to distinguish ourselves from them.
Yeah.
And I think that's why we're members of the ABAA.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's harder and harder to kind of, in my opinion, to kind of have people identify the brand, because they just go on there and see just this huge amount of material.
It's incredible.
And it's been kind of difficult for the ABAA and the ILAB to get their brand in competitiveness with, like, ABE Books, which is now owned by Amazon.
Yeah.
And they have a very different model in terms of what they want to do than what the ABAA and the ILAB. However, I mean, that's where it's gone, or where it is now. It doesn't mean it's always going to be there, but it's not a fun environment to sort of be involved in, I think.
Yeah. It's a lot different than what it once was, but
yeah, and I'm old enough to have an appreciation of what it was pre-internet. So, yeah.
Talk a little bit about what you think are the biggest challenges facing young booksellers as they come into the trade or want to come into the trade.
Right. Well, I think the ability to access material is probably a primary one, unless you have really deep pockets. I think that many people who come up in the trade start out with more knowledge than resources. But in the old days, sometimes that ability to have cunning and edge would enable you to sort of make a good deal, then another deal, and another good deal. And if you were smart with your resources, you could parlay that into better inventory.
And buying a building.
If you could do that too. I mean, I'm very happy that, that our family was able to, after, 65 years renting, they made a move to buy a building. But I think that more importantly, it was that sort of that access to material, a sort of a mentoring structure. The ABA provides that to some degree still, but not like it used to. You and I, you know that there were people that younger people gravitated towards.
Right.
They worked with them. Maybe
That's
they
right.
fed them material to the top dealer,
Right.
and in turn that dealer helped them and educated them, perhaps let them use their reference library, and perhaps partnered with them on material so that you could kind of learn. You needed apprenticeship.
Right.
I had an apprenticeship in my own family.
Right.
I worked with my uncle, back of him processing thousands of books. I met his customers. I went to auction with him. I learned a lot of that. I made my own friends and my own partnership.
Right.
But I wouldn't have gotten anywhere in this trade if I hadn't have had that apprenticeship. And I think we've kind of lost that in a certain way. So to start out, there are people that are still doing it. We have younger people in the trade.
Right.
We're just not having the same, when you came up, there was a generation.
Yeah.
I'm kind of the last one, I think, that kind of had a generation of booksellers entering the trade.
Right.
You're having a few enter, but what you're having is a lot of people going to exit at the top, but not as many resupplying the trenches, so to speak.
We try to do a survey of how many booksellers are in the ABAA who are under the age of 45, and it was a surprisingly small amount.
Right.
But if you did the same thing over 60, it was a very large amount.
Right. which shows
means
you that a lot of people came in between, say, 1968 and 1985.
Yeah.
Right.
And then it just stopped.
Right.
For some reason.
But there are younger people coming up, and there are ways of doing it, but it's not as easy as it used to be, I don't think.
I don't think so either, but hey, there are always going to be books.
There's always going to be books, and there's always going to be book collectors. The challenge is to continue the relevancy of the dealer, because so much of what the digital world does is provide a product to a person. And the challenge is to remain relevant as someone who's an interface. We all know, I mean, in your day, Michael, when you started out, the auction houses were mainly wholesale.
Right, absolutely.
They were not retail. Now the auction market has grabbed the retail customer.
That's right.
The dealer fights to be relevant within that matrix between the buyer and the seller. And it takes a lot of creativity, a lot of personality, a lot of education to create something value added as that individual. They're still out there. I mean, I'm very much an optimist, but when someone looks at the landscape of the rare book world now, I don't think it's as easy to conceive of making a living without perhaps other outside resources.
Yeah, or moonlighting, as it were.
Doing other things. Well, even myself. I mean, our family, from my grandfather to my uncle and father and to me, our sole income has been in the trades.
Right.
And so one of the things I do now is I diversify what I do. I help with collection development. My knowledge and background in working those years in databases, I help people get those things set up. I do a lot of appraisal work.
Yeah.
And then I buy and sell when I can. I buy what I like, just like you said before. If it's the only, and it's the best price and the best condition.
Mm-hmm. And that's the things that you have to look in terms of. The world has changed for us. Let me ask you one more or two more little questions before we run out of time. Who do you think are the great booksellers of our era, and who do you think are the up-and-coming stars in the trade?
Well, I have to admit that more of my sort of social and personal, relationship in the trade have to do in the photography community now than it does with the rare book community. But again, this has probably been a vote. I mean, you get the same answer every time, but I would have to say again. I mean, Bill Reese is more my age,
right.
But when you look at someone with taste, intellect, collegiality, resource to buy great material, understanding of institutional and private market. I don't see many people like that.
Very few.
In the photography books, I mean, young people coming up. I mean, Harper Levine is working very hard.
Yeah.
Jeff Hirsch is working very hard. These are the people that I know. Joseph Bray.
Joseph up-and-comer.
Who had apprenticeship with
the
Bill,
Reese Company, yeah.
But also has worked at UC San Diego. Joe's an incredible guy.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
Yeah, so those are kind of my area. Those are the people that I know that I interact with on a more regular basis, that are my juniors, and they're all great.
Yeah. I mean, they're all got something to offer to the trade, which is really the important thing.
Right.
Okay, Michael.
Good.
That's fastest 30 minutes in baseball, huh?
Thanks.
Thanks very much.
All right.